Good afternoon or morning, everyone, depending on where you are. Welcome to today's webinar, and thank you for joining us. My name is Deanna Helscher, and I'm the director of the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living and the regional dean at the UT Health Houston School of Public Health in Austin. Today's webinar is jointly hosted by the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living and the People Health and Place Lab at UT Austin. The center's vision is healthy children in a healthy world, and we have a mission to advance health and healthy living for children and families through our research, community-based interventions, and dissemination of best practices. So with the next slide, I'd like to give a thank you to the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation for providing funds to the center to host today's webinar, as well as the People Health and Place Lab at UT Austin. So other information about the center's work and resources can be found online. If you're interested, please scan the QR code on your screen to access these resources. The slides for and recording of today's webinar will be archived on our website, msdcenter.org, and you will be able to access it afterwards. So feel free to share it on social media or with other people that might benefit from this information. If you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them into the questions chat box for the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. With that, I'm so excited to introduce our speakers today, Drs. Jim Salas and Deborah Salvo. Dr. Salas is a distinguished professor emeritus in the Herbert Wertheim School of Public Health and Human Longevity Science at the University of California, San Diego. He is also director of active living research, a program of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. His primary research interests are promoting physical activity and understanding policy and environmental influences on physical activity, nutrition, and obesity. He is the author of over 500 scientific publications on the editorial board of several professional journals and one of the world's most cited social scientists. He received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the President's Council on Fitness, Sports, and Nutrition, and Time Magazine identified him as an obesity warrior. He has also served on the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living Scientific Advisory Board since the center's inception. And he's been integral to shaping what the center currently does in terms of research and development. Jim is an old friend, and we're so glad to see him here. You will really enjoy his perspective. Dr. Salvo is an associate professor of health behavior and health education in the Department of Kinesiology and Health Education of the College of Education at the University of Texas at Austin. She is a physical activity and public health scientist. Through her work, she seeks to understand the role of context on physical activity and health disparities, with a special emphasis on Latin American populations, both in the US and abroad. Her research is motivated by the pursuit of health equity and social justice. Her long-term goal is to provide contextually relevant evidence for reducing spatial health disparities and access to environments that enable physical activity, healthy and sustainable lifestyles for all. Dr. Salvo also was recently selected as president-elect for the International Society for Physical Activity and Health. So I'm so excited to have them both here. This will be a great presentation, and I'm now like to hand it over to Dr. Salas and Salvo.
Thank you, Deanna. It's so good to be back in Austin. I am located in Austin right now, so it's great to be here, and I got to know it pretty well by being on an advisor to the the Dell Center for quite a few years. And so it's my pleasure to start off this webinar. Could you go backwards? I want to see the preceding slide. And so we're going to talk to you today about a project that started with research, but was designed to try to make the whole world a healthier and more sustainable place, especially focusing on cities. And that sounds pretty grandiose, but that is our goal. So I'm going to talk about what we call indicators of healthy and sustainable cities, and the importance of having these indicators so cities can identify whether they're on the road to being healthier and more sustainable or not. Now, next slide. So here's the roadmap here. We're going to talk about planetary health as well as individual health, and how cities are important for driving both of these, either in a healthier direction or a less healthy direction. We're going to review very briefly some of the evidence linking urban design to active and healthy living. And that will be my task. And then I will hand it over to Dr. Salvo, who will tell you about how we have developed this global observatory for healthy and sustainable cities, and how we are using that observatory in what we call our 1,000 Cities Challenge. And you can be part of the 1,000 Cities Challenge, as we will explain later on. Next slide. We usually think of health as being influenced mainly by the healthcare system. And that is not true at all. Health is created and lived by people within the settings of our everyday life. So where we spend our time to learn, work, play, and love are the main drivers, or some of the main drivers of health. And so these places that we live are not inside us, and so we usually think of health as being driven by things that are inside us, our genes, our physiology, that sort of thing. And that's important, but the environments where we work and live are, I would say, similarly important and probably more important. And the World Health Organization has realized this since the mid-1980s, when they released the Ottawa Charter for Health Promotion. And so we're carrying on in that tradition, but the goal of we need to create a healthier world to have healthier people. Next slide. And so we're going to talk mainly about cities, but the world that we need to be concerned about is going beyond cities. So it's this idea of planetary health. And so we live in a world of systems within systems. And you see here, the smallest circle is the individual, or maybe the social system. And we have a system of public health that attempts to help people be healthier. But that public health system is within a global health system that is, maybe the World Health Organization is the best representation of that, and tries to help each country become healthier. But it's not just the health systems and individuals that we need to worry about. We need to think about One Health. And that One Health is focused on all living things. So the animal kingdom, the plant world. Our health is related to the animals and plants. And to just give you one example, we think the COVID came from the animal world in some form or another, as many infectious diseases do. So that's just one example. And then we need to think about the health of the planet. And the health of the planet is quite unstable right now. And we know that the planet is warming. We know that the weather is getting more extreme in both drought and rain and flood events. And so the planet is not healthy, and that is driving all of these systems. It's stressing. We're having a mass extinction event right now because of heat and weather disturbances. The global health system, the World Health Organization, is having to pay more attention to heat events and protecting people from heat. And public health systems in each country are adjusting to these things. And all of these levels of systems are affecting individuals' health. So we're not going to, and it turns out, as we see on the next slide, that these things are connected in ways you would not expect. So I'm going to come back to kind of planetary health, but I'm going to introduce that both Dr. Salvo and I are focused on physical activity, or the problem of physical inactivity. And it's a wicked problem because it's everywhere, and it's not getting better, and it's hard to change. And so this is a map of physical inactivity, and the redder the color, the more inactivity. And so you can see that the United States is in the red area. There are countries that are more inactive than we are, but there are many countries that are less inactive than we are. And physical inactivity is believed to be responsible. We have evidence it's responsible for over 5 million deaths per year worldwide. And those deaths are occurring primarily in low and middle income countries, and basically because that's where most of the people are. And there are many, many inactive people in every country. So we started with the problem of physical inactivity, but found that it is affected by all the levels of health that we looked at in the previous slide. So next slide. Along in the physical activity world, we have some good news and some bad news. The good news is we have interventions that we have shown with many studies can be effective. And you see this infographic from the International Society of Physical Activity and Health that's also adopted by the World Health Organization. These are 8 investments that work for physical activity, or we could also say these are 8 strategies for improving physical activity. And we're going to focus today on 2 of them, active travel and active urban design. And so we know a lot about how to design transportation systems and urban systems or cities that support and facilitate physical activity. So the bad news about these interventions is that they're not used sufficient level. And the efforts to create more active cities and more active transportation systems won't be easy and hasn't been easy. But we're not going to achieve more active and healthier people until we make some of the changes that we'll be talking about today. So next slide. So most people in the United States are not familiar with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And these are goals backed by measurable targets and indicators or measures of those targets to enhance planetary health, save the planet, and its inhabitants from major threats of the 21st century. And many of these goals, sustainable development goals, are related to health. But we're going to focus on goal 11 today, and that's sustainable cities and communities, and show how health of individuals is related to this goal. Next slide. So why are we focusing on cities in the context of greater planetary health? Because over half of the world's population lives in cities now, and by 2050, we expect that to be 2/3 of the world's population. So there's going to be, cities are going to grow. And so we want cities to make informed decisions about how they can grow their cities in healthy and sustainable ways. And Sustainable Development Goal 11 says that we need to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And this applies to towns and villages as well. So what are we talking about here? Sustainable transport. And that means giving people choices for transportation and reducing reliance and dependence on vehicular travel, especially when that vehicular travel is based on burning fossil fuels. And we want to make inclusive cities. And that means that the benefits of cities are shared across all neighborhoods and across all members or all residents of the cities. So if we have parks, we want those parks in all parts of the cities. If we have a good public transportation, we want that public transportation to serve all parts of the cities. And so you see this with equitable access to public open spaces and reduced pollution. So we want to change practices of putting polluting businesses and industries in the poorest neighborhoods. Um, uh, so, um, so we want not to burden some types of neighborhoods with pollution, but have it reduce pollution in the first place and have it the burden more equally shared across the city. Next slide. Um, okay, so this work that we're going to now describe to you goes back to 2016 when an international group that I was pleased to be a part of had this series or special issue of The Lancet, which is the world's most influential medical journal, on urban design, transportation, and health. And this was the first such series on something that doesn't really seem to be central to health, and that is urban design and transportation. Because it's not about clinics or vaccines or hospitals or better medical care. It's about designing cities and transportation systems to focus on health. This was a recognition that the health professions are recognizing the influences on health that are outside of the health systems or the health professions. Um, so, um, and so we introduced evidence about the influence of urban design and transportation on health in this series. So next slide. And the one of the goals is to talk about or to educate people how transportation, I would say urban design, has multiple impacts on health. And these impacts that are listed here, and I'm not going to read them all, but there are many, these are some of the biggest global health challenges in the 21st century. Each one of these health issues is a priority and is a pandemic, is a global health problem. Um, and they all are going to require changing transportation and changing urban design in order to solve these many health problems. So that is the big picture here that we are working on. And so in 2016, we identified these as problems that the health sector needs to be involved in. Next slide. And so since 2016, we have been working on how can we change urban design and transportation um, to um, to lead to better health outcomes across the world. And so here are a couple of concepts from really that we borrowed from the transportation and urban design field, and we now have adopted them in health. And one is walkability. And walkability is related to the design of place, of your neighborhood or your city, and how it relates to walking, especially for transportation. In the health field, we have traditionally thought about walking as something you do for exercise or for pleasure or to help your mental health. And in the United States, is we've kind of forgotten that you can also walk to get somewhere for transportation. And one of the reasons we've been forgetting about that is that we have adopted the idea, well, that cars and vehicles are how you get from one place to the other. We've put 99% of our transportation funding into vehicular travel and little or no funding into active transportation, walking, biking, and transit. We've kind of forgotten that you can walk to get from place to place, and you can bicycle to do that. But we talk about walkability, and what does that mean? It means that we design our streets that typically, hopefully, are in a grid pattern. So you have direct routes to go from your house to your job or to your school or to a store or to a restaurant. Instead of suburban streets, which are called often loops and lollipops, and where you don't have direct routes. So it takes so something that might be 100 yards away from you in a straight line, because of the loops and lollipops, maybe a half a mile or more if you go by the street. So diversity is diversity of uses in one sense. So so we think about things like, can you, in 15 minutes, how many destinations can you walk to? Can you walk to places that are more than just houses? Can you walk to your child's school? Can you walk to a shopping area? Can you walk to a restaurant? Can you walk to a library? And then density usually is a dirty word, frankly, in the United States. We've been taught, well, density is bad. But in order to have diversity of uses and to support multiple types of shops and to have multiple places of employment, you typically need density so that the distances are not so great. And so one of the studies that we did, the first study that our group based in San Diego did to determine whether walkability is related to physical activity was called the Nichols study. It's the Neighborhood Quality of Life study. And we recruited people from high and low walkability neighborhoods and high and low income neighborhoods. And so here are some of our results here on the right. And these are minutes per day of objectively measured physical activity. So we used an accelerometer, which everybody has in their phones or your smartwatch. And so we looked at how many minutes per day people are walking. And you see in the green bars, if you lived in a walkable neighborhood, you did more physical activity every day than people who lived in a low walkability neighborhood. And we see similar differences regardless of whether the neighborhood income is low or high. And just to give you a sense, these are like 5 to 7 minute differences in walkability. And you would think, well, that's not very much. But when you calculate things out, 7 minutes per day of physical activity is about 50 minutes per week, and that's about 2 miles approximately if you walked real slow. And if you did that for over a year, then or about a year, that's 100 miles extra walking, and theoretically, that would prevent about 2 to 3 pounds of weight gain per year. So, and that would be extremely significant because that's the average American adult gains less than that per year, but gains weight per year instead of staying stable. Okay, so that's why urban design is important for health, or one of the reasons. Next slide. Another one of our studies, based on the Nichols study, we recruited colleagues from around the world to do a similar study, to recruit people who lived in high walkable versus low walkable neighborhoods, and also lower income versus higher income. So 12 countries participated in this study. In 17 cities. You can see the countries listed. And you can see that if you look at the US, that is the variation in walkability and walking that we observed in our US study. And you can see that that's a minuscule part of the worldwide variation that we achieved when we recruited 11 more countries. And you can see that the US has the lowest walking and lowest walkability. So, so with greater variability, we have greater statistical power to see what is the relation between walking, and other health outcomes. And so next slide. For the current project, we used IPEN data to gather evidence about what would be optimal or near optimal walkability that we could then use to say this is a goal that we recommend to cities to promote health and environmental sustainability. So here you see two curves. One is we're looking at basically walking, accumulating physical activity on the vertical axis, and then two indicators of walkability on the horizontal. One is population density, and so you see we have a kind of a optimal population density of around 60, and intersection density a different cutoff. So we have a threshold of 122 intersections per square kilometer, and with population density about 6,500 people per square kilometer. And you can see if you have more than that, well, physical activity will increase, but we wanted to get an optimal range. And you see, it looks like if you have too much density or too many intersections, physical activity may go down a little bit. So we have this zone of thresholds. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Salvo. So let's go to the next slide. And she's going to tell you how we used this evidence and what we knew previously about active, healthy, and sustainable communities to use this evidence to get more cities to adopt indicators so they would know whether they are going in a healthier and more sustainable direction or whether they are not going in that direction. So, Deborah, it's my pleasure to turn this eager crowd over to the things of wisdom that you have to say to us.
Thank you very much, Jim. As always, it's great to work and present with you. So as Dr. Salas has very eloquently informed us about, we have a lot of evidence that shows the connections between urban design and urban transport systems and health. A lot of it comes through this pathway of increased physical activity, but he did also tell us about many other benefits of healthy urban design and healthy transportation systems for other outcomes that relate to health. And now I'd like to tell you a little bit about where we're taking this evidence to move from the research space into policy and practice. So I did want to share that some of this work is really to be credited to Dr. Billy Giles Cortai in Australia. Her Healthy Livable Cities lab or research group developed since 2013 a model of healthy livable neighborhoods and healthy livable cities. So in addition to some of the concepts that you just learned about from Dr. Salas, talking about walkability and other types of indicators associated with physical activity and health, her group expanded the definition of what healthy urban design should look like to not just talk about walkable neighborhoods, but to talk about livable neighborhoods. So bringing this concept a little higher. And so what do we mean by healthy and livable neighborhoods? The definition that her group put out that we're still using in our observatory is that we're talking about places that are safe, attractive, socially cohesive, and inclusive, as well as being environmentally sustainable, and that have affordable and diverse housing, and that these housing options are very well linked to key elements of our daily living, including employment, education, public open spaces, local shops, health and community services, as well as leisure and cultural opportunities for everyone. And one of the important pieces of this definition is not just saying that diverse and affordable housing has to be linked to all these things in order to be safe, attractive, etc., all the things in the top of the definition, but it also talks about how the linkage is done. And so the linkage should be done, ideally, through convenient and efficient public transportation, as well as walking and cycling infrastructure. And as you can see, one thing that is completely removed from this definition are cars and car dependencies. So urban livability is a concept that integrates, yes, walkability, as Jim was talking about, but also transport systems, as well as many other key components like social infrastructure, good access to employment, to housing, to public open space, and even things like good air quality. Next slide, please. So taking this definition into consideration, the group that originally got together in 2016, as Dr. Salas explained, to publish that initial Lancet series on urban design, transport, and health, decided that it was time to take some of these concepts that they had put forth in that initial series in the form of a conceptual framework, and to really start getting a bit more tangible in the sense of developing measurable indicators about cities that responded to each of these concepts, like transportation, access to employment, density, etc., all of these things that were included in the conceptual framework. And so essentially what we did, I had the pleasure and the honor of being part of this working group for the follow-up series, is to work on a follow-up Lancet series published in the Lancet Global Health, where what we would do here was a proof of concept of saying some of these things that we are defining livability as are actually measurable, and not just in one place with excellent access to data like Australia, where this all started, but across the world. We are capable and able, if we work together using a team science model, to develop indicators that are comparable across cities of the world, that can use open data and open source software. And we can work together towards the purpose of measuring how cities are doing with respect to urban health and livability. And therefore, once we have data and measure them, to benchmark where we should be going, and to set goals and targets for better urban design and transportation systems for health in cities across the world. So this international collaboration included over 80 investigators from multiple institutions across the world, and it included collecting data through open sources, cleaning those data and processing them in standardized ways, and validating these procedures in 25 cities belonging to 19 countries in all inhabited continents of the world. Next slide, please. And so what is it that we measured with this proof of concept exercise? First of all, first I'll say that it's divided in two major categories, what it is that we measured. The first category, which is what you see represented with the information on this slide, which I'll run you through it in a moment, has to do with spatial indicators about cities. By spatial indicators, we mean if we were to go outside and measure how the urban design of a city looks like and what those features are, and if they are meeting or not meeting standards related to health and sustainability, that's what we would do. So it's measuring what's implemented on the ground outside in cities. And the other major component that is included in our measurement toolkit and in this proof of concept exercise was the measurement of policies. So we would identify policy instruments that relate to urban planning and urban design policies that are in place in cities from across the world, and understand from those policy documents if the right types of policies are in place to promote healthy and sustainable living. So let me run you through what's on this slide, which relates to the spatial indicator part of the framework. So the first thing that we did was operationalize what we are calling walkable catchment areas, which essentially means for each of these 25 cities, we divided them not so much in a grid, but you can imagine it like a grid. It was more, it was in hexagons, so contiguous hexagons across the city, and each of these hexagons represented, if you were standing in the middle of that hexagon in the city and walked out in any direction, to get to the edge of the hexagon, you'd be walking 500 meters, which is roughly equivalent to a 5-minute walk at average walking speed. So that's what we did. We first divided up the city into 5-minute walking areas represented as contiguous hexagons. The next thing that we did is for each of these little hexagons across all of these 25 cities where we did the proof of concept exercise, we measured things in the same way across the board. So we measured population and street intersection densities. And these are variables that, as Dr. Salas just explained, we know that are highly associated with people's ability to lead active lifestyles and to walk from place to place, especially to utilitarian walking for transportation. But we also measured the availability of certain characteristics or urban features within these hexagons representing a 5-minute walk, such as access to a healthy food supermarket or market, to a convenience store, to public transit, to public open space, as well as other features not mentioned on this slide, to keep things simple. We also calculated a daily living access score that combined 3 of the most commonly used destinations by individuals in neighborhoods. And we also measured for each of these hexagons a local walkability index based on the evidence that Jim presented, from the IPEN study and the Nichols study. Next slide, please. And so the other side of what the observatory measures are these urban policy indicators. So in terms of urban policy documents, what we do first is identify in each of the 25 cities what the currently operating policy documents are for urban planning and urban transport systems. And within them, we have a standardized way, a checklist, to determine how this policy document, if at all, treats these 9 major topics that we know relate to healthy living and to sustainable living. The first one being integrated planning, which relates to this notion of whether policies around urban planning, urban expansion plans, etc., include all the necessary sectors within them, or if they're really led by a single sector. So for instance, if you have a really good integrated planning policy, you would have a very clear mention and responsibilities attached to multiple sectors, including sectors related to air quality and the environment, to transportation planning, to urban mobility, to parks and recreation, to sustainable development, to cultural activities, many sectors that have to do with what a healthy, vibrant city should look like. And here you have, I'm not going to read them all, but all the other sort of main themes within each of these, we have individual indicators, not one per category, but multiple indicators per category. And essentially what we do is go through these policy documents in a very standardized way to understand, first, are each of these elements actually mentioned? Second, is the mention of these indicators in the right direction for the promotion of health and sustainability? You'd be surprised, but many times the information that does show up is actually promoting the development of a city that is not going to be health friendly, activity friendly, and therefore a sustainable city. For instance, if you see a city where the current urban planning policy is saying we need to add more parking spots across the city, that goes against everything that we know works to reduce car dependency and increase physical activity for walking, for getting to places. And so these are all the major themes included in the urban policy indicator checklist. Next slide, please. And so once we had this proof of concept done, in the sense that, one, we published a series with all the science behind it demonstrating how we could take this conceptual framework of these sort of themes within the realm of what makes a city livable and healthy and sustainable, that we could actually measure these things and quantify them and do it in the same way across multiple cities from the world. What we wanted to do was not just leave this as a publication in the Lancet Global Health Journal, which has a high reputation and will be read by other scientists, but probably not so much by people sitting in urban planning departments in cities, at the mayor's office, et cetera, that can actually use the information to determine if their city is doing well and where they need improvement. So what we decided to do was create this website, which we called the Global Observatory of Healthy and Sustainable Cities. And what this website includes is, yes, information and links to all those papers and to all the science behind things, but most importantly, it includes a lot of practical tools for anybody that's interested in knowing how their city is doing with respect to these spatial and policy indicators, to get that information and to use it to advocate for better urban planning for health. and sustainability. So we invite you to visit our website and take a look at what's there. The map on the right-hand side of the slide shows the location of the original 25 cities where the proof of concept was done and for which everything was calculated in the first place. Next slide, please. So what's the goal of our observatory? We aim to provide comparable evidence-based spatial and policy indicator data of healthy and sustainable urban design and planning for cities across the globe. We do have some guiding principles which we are very committed to, which is to keep our use of open data and open science at all times, so that we don't have to rely on things that are behind paywalls or that some people, depending on their institutional affiliation, may or may not have access to. We work with a model of interdisciplinary team science. We try to use global data for local impact. So this is very important to us. It's not just an interesting exercise of scientists that are trying to compare cities across the world, but we hope that the information, the local information of each city that belongs to the observatory, can be used to advocate for change locally. And we are highly committed to capacity building and equitable international collaborations. Our vision for all this is to grow to include additional indicators and comparable data for over 1,000 global cities. Next slide, please. So what does the observatory provide? If you go to our website and click through some of the links there, what is it that you would get in terms of information about each of the cities that currently participate in the observatory? One thing that you can get is download city indicator reports. We started off by having these be 4-page reports with very manageable and digestible information of how each city did with respect to every single thing that we measure, both spatially and policy-wise. Now these indicators have grown a bit and are 8 pages each, so still fairly manageable. And really, we want these indicators in the hands of people that really sit in the offices within each city that can actually make some decisions and improve environments for their residents. Next slide, please. For each of the participating cities, we even have a simpler way of presenting things, which we're calling the city indicator scorecards. And the top part of this scorecard, here you have my hometown, Mexico City, shown. So the top part shows the spatial indicators. So for instance, you see that 19.7% of the population has access to regularly running formal public transportation. So not a lot. Now, if you go to the city, you'll see a lot of other buses there, but they are not part of formal systems. They're not regularly running. They may be highly polluting. So we did have very strict inclusion criteria in terms of what we are trying to achieve here. And the bottom part of the slide here, or of each scorecard, shows how the city did with respect to policy indicators. You see that you have 3 things that can light up or not. The first one just shows, is this type of policy even present in the currently operating policy documents? The second one shows, is the policy aligned with the promotion of health and sustainability? And the third one, really important one, shows if the city is truly committed to this or if it's more aspirational. If it's committed to it, it will have measurable targets and assigned budgets for this. Next slide, please. So I'd like to close by saying that both research and data, such as data for this type of global observatory, still remain lacking from where or for whom it is most needed. The map on the top of this slide shows the countries of the world sort of graded, either stretched out or shrunken down, to represent the number of people that live in these countries, so population size. As Dr. Salas mentioned earlier, the majority of the world lives in low and middle income countries. But we have most data available and most research available with respect to how to make cities healthier and just in general with physical activity research at large from richer countries of the world, from high income countries. So I'm using this slide sort of as a call to action to really start thinking globally, because the challenge of climate change and many of the public health challenges that Dr. Salas introduced his talk with are affecting us all and cross international borders. So if we don't work collaboratively across nations, it will be really difficult to tackle these problems. Next slide, please. I do want to say that since our proof of concept idea and since we launched the observatory, we have grown. We currently have full reports and scorecards available in the observatory, so really active members from 40 cities. So we grew from 25 to 40, and we do have about 45 new cities that are currently in the process of calculating indicators. So we are getting close to 85 to 90 cities that by the end of the year should have indicator data available. But as you see, that number, about 90 cities, is still far from our challenge, or from the challenges that we set out ourselves to achieve, of having comparable data available in our observatory for over 1,000 cities across the globe. And why 1,000 cities? Other than it being a catchy number, we know that the majority of the world right now, and even more so, will live in cities in the near future. So we want to make sure to have good data and good information to promote health and sustainability for everyone, not just for a few cities where there happen to be really good spatial and policy scientists available. Next slide, please. So also on our website, we have a series of training instruments and tools for anybody that's interested in joining the observatory and calculating indicators for their cities. To review webinars, to assess our tools or training videos. Everything is open access, and we are always available to support the process if you are interested in assembling a team to calculate indicators and join the observatory and become a part of our collaborative. Next slide, please. And with this, I close our talk today, just inviting everyone to please help us and join the 1,000 Cities Challenge, and we're happy to take your questions.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Salvo and Dr. Salas, for your great presentation. I always like learning about what we can do to improve our cities and make them healthier and more sustainable. So we do have a question from the audience, and if anyone else has a question, please drop them into the question box and we will answer them. So this one is really great. Has the information and data been utilized to work with policymakers and those who work in urban design? It seems like our built environment is influenced by city and state policy and funding, and depending on the state, some positive changes toward healthier and sustainable cities is very challenging, especially when some industries, such as the vehicle industry, lobby toward less healthy and sustainable measures.
Should I go?
You start.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you for the question. It's an excellent question. The whole point of our observatory, as I said, is to not just have interesting data available, but to get the data used for policy and action. We do have some examples of initial success with this regards. And the first one being that when we launched the Lancet Global Health Series in 2021, which alongside literally the day that it went live on the internet, this academic series, we also launched the website with the observatory. And following that, in the next 2 to 3 months, many of these 25 cities that were part of the proof of concept stage, working collaboratively with us, but also with local partners, much more importantly with local partners, hosted a series of launch events in their cities where they invited the press, where they invited different ministries or departments, depending on their political structure, of health, of urban planning, of sustainability, air quality, you name it, to disseminate this information. We also have among our partners of the Global Collaborative, we have several members that serve as the liaison between those of us that produce evidence and those entities that lead to action. So for instance, in India, we have a person that his title, he's a bicycling mayor. He's part of a network of global bicycling mayors, which are essentially advocates that have training in getting evidence in the hands of policymakers to promote better urban design strategies and safety strategies and all types of strategies for urban cycling. So that's one example. Another example, and I'll leave it at that, so Dr. Salas can add something, is recently with working with the team in St. Louis, Missouri, so one team here in the US, which is one of our new additions. They weren't part of the 25 initial cities. They joined our observatory, calculated our indicators, and alongside that launched a local observatory for St. Louis, tracking all types of things livability based, including our indicators as well as many more. And they have formed a collaborative with the city and the county of St. Louis to work towards funding some actions and some strategies based on where they're not doing well with some of the indicators. So that's a huge success. And our colleague, Dr. Rodrigo Reyes, is spearheading all that there. So we do have some examples of success, but we need more of that for sure.
And I want to follow up to complement what Dr. Salvo talked about, and focus on the questioner's emphasis on the need for advocacy, because you are right. Advocacy is, I think, the best investment that a business can make, and they are not shy about making it. So if you're a polluter and you want to keep on polluting, the way that you do that is you advocate to the lawmakers by giving them money. Then they will typically vote like you want them to vote so that you can keep on polluting or poisoning people in other ways. This goes on day after day. But who advocates for parks? Who advocates for sidewalks? Who advocates for public transit? And some of the things that are in the direction of creating healthier and more sustainable cities. Well, I'm afraid that's up to us because those are not big money-making industries. They don't have a lot of, the parks departments, you know, there's a public entity. They can't advocate for themselves. So that's up to us. And and that is something all of us can do. And whenever I give a talk, pretty much to whoever it is, students, academics, general public, I always ask them, encourage them to get involved in advocacy where you live, because there are advocacy groups for public health, for walking, for bicycling, for public transit. And in fact, the main reason I am in Austin today is because I'll be participating in the Texas a conference being put on by the Texas Bicycle Coalition. And so this is about active transportation. And so I am going to try to bring useful evidence to these advocates. If they're coming to this conference, they're probably already advocates. So I want to give them more evidence-based information that they can use to make their advocacy more successful. So I'm afraid, you know, we can't just say, well, somebody ought to do something. And in this case, if you want a healthier and more sustainable city, country, and world, it's up to you and all of us.
So we have time for one quick question. And so the next question is, how can these indicators like walkability count for different populations' needs, like those with disabilities?
Deb, that's for you.
Okay. So I think, thank you for the question. I think you're touching on a very important topic, and honestly something that has been understudied. But I do think that the things that we are advocating for, the things that the data show matter in terms of how you design a city, match up really well with a city that would be great if you have a disability or if you're an 8-year-old child or an 80-year-old person. And I'm going to actually call out on a framework by Gil Peñalosa, who was he's a politician, former mayor in Bogota, that did a lot of really progressive changes in favor of pedestrians, of the people, really, lots of investment in parks, in public transportation, sidewalks, cyclist infrastructure. He talks about creating the 880 city. And the 880 city is, if you imagine this utopia, is a place where you'd feel perfectly comfortable letting either your 8-year-old child or your 80-year-old parent or grandparent go out on a walk, go out to buy something in the nearby store, take public transportation without the fear that they will be ran over by a car or fear of crime or anything like that. It's a city that's perfectly designed for anybody to be outside without being chaperoned. I can see the parallels with a city for someone, for instance, requiring to move on a wheelchair. If you create cities that are great for people that have mobility challenges, you're creating an inclusive and a healthy and sustainable city for anyone. So I do think that conceptually these things are really well tied together, but I also want to say that we need much more evidence and research that focuses on these specific population groups. And if we do that, we will ensure inclusivity for everyone.
Yes, I agree. And let me just say one thing as I think an important follow-up. Gil Peñalosa, who Deborah mentioned, is going to be at the conference this week in Austin. So you can hear him, get to meet him, find out all the wonderful work that they're doing that is needed everywhere. So please come, or try to get a recording afterwards.
So we're to the end of our time. There's a few other questions, but we can kind of give them to the speakers and get some quick answers from them. So just to remind you, if you need CHESS or MCHESS credit, make sure you email us and we'll give you instructions on how to apply for that. Thank you all for attending today's webinar. We really appreciate it. The recording, slides, and then resources mentioned. So we can link you to where you need to go if you want to sign up to be a participating city. We can send that out to all attendees afterwards. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.